Printers Part 4. In this final video on printers, and again, I know it's a lot of information about printers, but man, it's the biggest objective on the A+ exam objective. And we'll talk about the configuration of the printers. We talked about that a little bit in the past. We'll look at some more specifics there, as well as maintenance issues regarding your printers and how to troubleshoot those printers. We'll also take a look at scanners. A lot of the things that relate to printers also apply to scanners, so I don't have a totally separate video on scanners, but we'll take a look at some specific information that relates only to scanners here as well. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the various configurations for the printers. Now, a lot of that was already shown you when I went to a printer. It doesn't matter which one here. Go to the properties, and you can choose the various printing preferences, such as which tray it uses. I can say automatically select or tray 1, tray 2. One of these may have envelopes, cardstock, cover pages, that sort of thing. I can also change the decision of whether it's going to be letter size or legal, and so forth. So all those types of settings can be configured through here. Now, this looks different depending on the printer. This interface really is a combination between a Windows dialog box and the input from the printer manufacturer and the software that's installed at installation, because some of these options aren't available for all printers. For example, one of the things that I have available with this one, of course, is that it is color. If I want to, I can always print in grayscale if I want to. So there's a lot of different kinds of options there. We don't need to go into a lot of detail for all of those. Just be aware of the fact that all of those types of options are available for you there. The printer settings, such as tray switching, printer spool settings, which I already showed you. For different types of printers, there might be device calibration that you can configure as well. And remember, this is where I would also choose my page orientation, whether it was landscape or portrait. Another thing you'll want to do at times, as I mentioned before, is you'll want to run various types of tests. The most common one that we'll be running will be those test pages that we do the same way that we do when we first install a printer, or if later on we're running into a problem with that printer, we can go back to its properties and manually click print test page here again to see if it gives us any output. There are also various types of other tests and calibrations that you can get depending upon the printer. Most conventional laser printers are just going to give you that print test page thing. But there may also be some kind of software with various other printers that will allow you to configure additional options. So for example, if I go to my HP printer that we worked with before, I can have some system diagnostics. Again, I'm not going to exhaust this because it's specific to the Hewlett-Packard printer, but it does show me system information, other things that might have an effect upon whether or not I'm printing out properly. For example, it might identify that I don't have very much memory. Maybe that's causing a printing slowdown. Or I have very little hard drive space. I've actually got plenty. But if I had very little hard drive space, then that could affect the spooling of the print job. So that kind of information could be very useful here. We also have, actually, let me go back to that. We also have logging that takes place, and I can go and look at some HP installation logs if we had trouble with the installation of the drivers or certain other things that were going on there. And then what we'll often see with these programs as well, and I think I'm going to right-click on this and just choose Open, so I can keep this menu option here open instead, as we can go to look at other things that will help us to identify certain issues. So for example, I can go to the HP director in this case, and again, it's this different for all the different ones, but I can go into this now, and I can go to my settings, and you'll see similar settings for whatever your printers are, and I can go into the printer settings, and I can go into something like the printer toolbox. Here's where I would do things, and this is especially true of inkjet printers and even more so color inkjet printers. I can choose to align the printer, for example. This will be the case if you look at how, I don't know if you can see this in the graphic there, but how there's a color that's kind of outside the box. It's not quite lined up. Sometimes you'll see that in newsprint as well, where the color newsprint of the print press gets kind of offset so that you see kind of a ghosting of the color. Well, that means that the printers become misaligned. This may especially be true if you've had to move it at some time from one office to the next. You might have jostled it around a little bit, so it needs to be fixed that way. You can also calibrate the color so you get better color rendition, again, specific to the brand. You might need to clean the print cartridges as well. You might get streaks or lines through your letters. That's usually an indication on an inkjet printer that one of the heads is jammed up. If it's been sitting for a long time, especially, the ink might have hardened inside of the print head there, and so it's not squirting or shooting through one of those nozzles properly. You can also print a test page here, which gives you a little bit of an idea of whether or not you're getting the proper color as well. For example, if I print a test page here, it might show me that I'm getting streaks in one of the colors. That means then that I need to clean that print head. It does use ink. It has to forcibly, jam ink through that print head. It really is just a matter of pressure, hoping that it will clean it up. And you might have to even clean it twice if it's a particularly bad problem. I can also calibrate this printer by clicking on this option here. It'll help to make sure that I get a better quality out of my photos, especially again if it's a color printer. The calibration helps to identify where the print heads are, how much ink needs to go through for each color, so it gives me a better quality that way. And then I can print a diagnostic page, which just gives me generic information. In this case, it gives me the serial number of the printer and a pattern test, a print pattern test. Most of these, by the way, like the print test page and the print diagnostics page, will print out some kind of a pattern so you can identify whether there's streaks in it or whether something is offset and needs to be aligned or calibrated. Another thing I like about this software piece is that it gives me an estimated ink level here, and I can see whether I'm short on any of these ink colors. Now this kind of a cartridge uses a tricolor print cartridge. Normally that's pretty okay for multifunction printers, but if I had a print job where I had a customer that had mostly cyan colors in their leaflets, for example, my wife runs a business as well, and she is a public speaker, and her brochures are mostly kind of a magenta maroon color, so she uses a lot of this middle color right away. So I'm almost full on the other two colors, but since they're all contained in one cartridge, if I run out of cyan, I have to replace the whole thing. Not very cost effective, so for her stuff, I actually go to my color laser so I can just replace the magenta by itself instead, and then it shows me the color, or rather the black print cartridge here as well. Now, when it comes to various types of upgrades, there could be a firmware update. Honestly, I can't remember the last time I did a firmware update to a printer. Most updates to printers relate to getting an updated driver. Rarely do we have to do firmware updates, but if you have to do that, it may take place through software. So there may be a software piece, just like our HP directory. There might be an updated item in here, which would allow us to download to, oops, I'm out of paper. I just printed out a test page and I'm out of paper. Another handy feature of bidirectional printing through a USB or bidirectional printer cable. But much like the PC itself, of course, firmware would be updated through something like a CMOS chip, where it can maintain information about the basic programming of that device. And then there's the driver, which I just addressed. Remember in our HP directory over here, there's a software update, so I can look for updated software related to doing these other things. These aren't really drivers directly, but the software update would also give me the latest drivers. Or I could simply go to Hewlett-Packard's website and do an easy search on this particular printer, and it'll show me anything that's more recent than my existing drivers. And then another upgrade we could do, and we already discussed this, and I showed you the slots there for the memory of the sockets. You can upgrade the memory if necessary as well on most of your printers. Again, more important for laser printers. And then when it relates to optimization, that's also really dealing a lot with the things that I've already shown you here as well. So that if we go into a specific printer and go to properties, optimization relates to all of these different kinds of things. Such as on the Advanced tab, remember, this is where we configure our spooling. We can optimize the way the print jobs go out by changing the spooling and a lot of the other dialog boxes that I've already shown you. Also, with this current version of the A+ exams, they want to make sure that we have properly interfaced with our users so that we have educated them with how to use things, for example. Now, in many IT departments, an IT administrator or help desk person will install the printer for that user already so that when they go into printers and faxes, it's already populated with whichever printers they need. If they don't have it that way, especially in a smaller office, users can install these printers without special administrative privileges if they're shared from another computer. If it's a fresh printer driver that they're trying to install on a local computer, they may have to be logged on as administrator for that. But again, shared drivers will normally be okay. And then in terms of the user education, the other things we need to do is to be able to show the user how to actually use that printer. Now, for something that's pretty conventional printer that's just, black and white laser, you just hit print, right? But for certain other things like this color laser jet, it's got quite a few properties here. And if I go to printing preferences, then we can see that it's got a lot of different things that I can use. I need to tell the user what's in the different trays and what kind of paper is in these different trays. I might also need to tell the users something about the effects. One of the things that I like to do is go ahead. Actually, I'm on the wrong tab. On the finishing, that is to print on both sides. And this is one of the features of this printer. That's one of the reasons why I bought it, because it saves me paper. By printing on both sides, I can print out a big manual, a 100-page manual that's only 50 pages in actual physical pages. So again, this is something where the user might not know how to get to. You might need to help them. Also, the users might be printing everything out in color when they really only need monochrome. I can go to color here and say, hey, instead of using all our color cartridges, why don't you just print in grayscale? Yeah, I'm sure they'll listen to me and do that. But anyway, that's at least where the information is, and we can help the user out by being better educated. They're going to call us less often. Now, as it relates to printers, another thing you need to make sure is that they're properly maintained. You can get maintenance kits. Now, the reality of the situation here now is that laser printers especially can be so inexpensive that you might just as well replace them as replace a lot of the rollers and the parts and things like that. However, if there is a maintenance kit available for it, you might just buy the maintenance kit instead, and this would be useful for larger corporate types of printers where they have a very high volume of usage. You can buy the maintenance kit from Hewlett-Packard or whoever it is, and this will allow you to replace the fuser, the rollers, the most commonly used moving parts especially, that might need to be replaced more frequently. And while the printer still has good life, just needs kind of an overhaul, if you will. These will usually include instructions, step-by-step instructions on which parts to replace, and the safety issues there as well. As long as I'm talking about safety there, you do have to be careful that anytime you open up the computer to work on it, you should turn off and unplug that printer, because that is an issue. There are a lot of high-voltage devices inside of a printer, especially as it has to charge the laser and do a lot of these things. You're talking about 600 volts of electricity. You're also talking about capacitors that might be in there. Hopefully you're not touching any of those things. But be careful about that electrically speaking. And then also when you install a maintenance kit, a lot of times there will be a counter reset. You can usually go to the counter reset through the front panel of the printer, and with your administrator privileges, you can reset that to 0. Some require the privileges to do that. Others will allow just anybody to be able to walk up and do so. And the advantage to resetting the counter to 0 is you can see how much that maintenance kit has been in use, and when maybe it gets to 400,000 pages, it needs to get a new maintenance kit, and you can keep track of the maintenance requirements there. Also, in terms of the environmental requirements, you want to keep any computer equipment in a cooler space. I would not keep your computers in warm spaces. Of course, your printers have a fuser, which heats up to over 300 degrees anyway. So from that perspective, it's going to get warmer. But you do want to make it in a safe environment where that users are not tripping over the power cables and things are tucked neatly away. And then you also want to make sure that you keep the MSDS. What in the world is that? The Material Safety Data Sheet. I'll show you an example of one of those. And here's an example of an MSDS sheet right here for my Epson inkjet cartridges. Anytime you have chemicals around, then you need to have an MSDS sheet for it. And it's primarily for safety purposes, helps you to identify who the manufacturer is, what the product actually is. This is useful if it gets tossed in the air somehow, or it becomes powder, or if it burns and it emits smoke. Those fumes might be noxious, or if somebody drinks it. I don't know why you'd want to drink ink, but anyway, someone drinks it or something like that, tells you the kind of information that's in it, what happens if it gets in your eyes, all the kind of health effects that might be related to this. And this is, of course, important in conjunction with a first aid plan for the chemicals that you have on hand. And of course, the MSDS sheets apply to any chemicals, not just printer cartridges and things like that, but any other kind of chemicals, cleaning supplies and the like, that you have in the corporate workspace. Now, when it comes to troubleshooting your printers, normally I'm going to cover other troubleshooting issues for the most part in special troubleshooting sections. The reason why I'm covering troubleshooting in the printer sections here of this video series is because there's so much to it, and there's such an emphasis on printing in any way within the A+ exam objectives. But let's quickly go through some of the things that you'll see. First of all, you might be out of paper. That's why the printer's not printing. Duh. If you're fortunate like me, then you even get a message from the printer saying, hey, we're out of paper here. Go ahead and put some more paper in there. We also can take a look at things such as the printer queue. If we have a lot of printer jobs in the queue, we might see one that'll say that it has an error, and it could be blocking up other print jobs behind it. Usually we'll just cancel that one print job and allow the other print jobs to go on through. Print jobs are usually replaceable. They're usually printed out of a file. It's not like you've deleted the file, that user's Word document or something. If you cancel their print job, they can just hit print again the next time they need to print it. So it's usually not as mission critical as the actual files themselves. And then you may also have something wrong with the spooler. You see, Windows works with something called the spooler service. Now let me show you a couple of ways of getting there. If I go into my computer, right-click, and choose Manage, then we'll see that there's a Services and Applications item here. And if I go to the Services node of this console, we'll see something called Print Spooler. Now, what's misleading about this is, within this list, it's called Print Spooler. But as a service from the command line, it's just called the Spool service, or Spooler. So it's a little bit confusing, but if I double-click on this, then we can see that it starts up automatically. That's the normal behavior for this. You might have problems with print jobs if someone's been fiddling around in this and decided to experiment and they disabled this service. Well, you're not going to be able to print anything if this item is stopped. Also, it might have just been manually stopped somehow, so if they click on Stop, then you can go back in here and click on Start. This is also a useful way to kind of give a refresh to that service. Sometimes something might have happened to that spooler service, might have a corruption in the memory or something like that, might have tried to handle a print job that sent it for a loop somehow, so you can stop and start the print spooler service. That's one of the most common ways, by the way, of getting the print jobs going again. The other way would be to turn off and turn on the printer itself. That's another common way of troubleshooting for these kinds of things. Now, what I usually do is I just do this from the command line. I'll just kind of give you a free bonus. To me, it seems faster to do it from the command line. If I want to stop and restart the spooler service, I'll do it this way: net stop spooler, and press enter. Then I think I can type here, net start spooler, and it starts up again. Now, if I want to do this another way, I could even create this in a batch file, and I just call it maybe spooler.bat, and I can create a notepad document that would be able to do this, and I'll just put all of this that I'm about to type on a single line. Net stop spooler, ampersand, net start spooler, ampersand, exit. Okay, and that will just simply close out the command prompt. Of course, with a batch file, you don't actually have to have the exit on the end of there, but if I'm a command line here and I want to do all those at once and I don't have to type them all in manually separately, just press enter and it'll stop the service. Then we'll see it automatically start the service, and then it'll exit from the command line window entirely. And similar to restarting the spooler service I mentioned earlier, you can also reset the printer. That just means, turn off the power and turn it on. Try to make sure that there's not already paper running through it when you do that, because then you're going to have a jam, and my, aren't those always fun to get out. Jams are just mostly going to be a matter of common sense in terms of getting them out. A paper might have gotten torn inside of there, or it might have gotten locked up or caught between two rollers that it shouldn't have or something. This is very often the case, especially in duplex printers, because they send the print job out and then it almost completely exits the paper, and it has to do that so that it goes through the fuser and it fuses onto one side. Then it sucks the paper back in, and sometimes when it sucks it back in, it gets caught in a roller and you have to undo the whole thing. Just open all available doors on the printer and see if you can follow the paper path to get it out. You might need to get a pair of tweezers sometimes to get little tiny pieces of paper out of it, and especially wicked printer jams, but that's just the way it goes. Also, some printers will send back bidirectional messages to your computer monitor telling you that there is a printer jam. Very useful for remote printers that are in a print room or something like that. And they'll also usually tell you that there's a jam on the status window of the actual physical printer itself. And that's the other thing you can do, is to look at the status messages on that window. You can also get status messages, by the way, depending on the printer, if you look at the software for that printer. And a good example of that is if I go back to my HP directory here, there's a status item right here. I simply click on that, and it will show me that my 6200 series printer is ready. Otherwise, it might tell me that it's out of ink, or it's got a jam, or it's out of paper, or some other such message. Now, in the troubleshooting process, the CompTIA likes to take us through a series of steps. Now, they don't really organize these very well in terms of the exam objectives. That's because the objectives are not supposed to be what teaches you this information. So I've kind of ordered these in a logical flow for you. The first thing you'd want to do is to identify the symptom of the problem. Normally, you're going to hear this from a user, not your own usage, but you might hear this from a user saying, hey, I can't seem to print. Well, then you have to start a communication process, and we'll talk about communicating with your customers later on in this series, but you want to get clear with them and say, well, what do you mean it won't print? Well, she said, well, I'm trying to print, and nothing's coming out of the printer. Okay. Is there a light blinking? Oh yeah, this little orange light is blinking. Did you look at the little LCD panel on the front of the printer? What does it say? Oh, it says it's out of paper. Great, we've identified the system. Now we know how to proceed. But it may also give just cryptic error messages. It might just say, the user might tell you, well, it says code 46 on the front of the printer. Well, of course, the user's not going to know what that is, and quite frankly, I'm probably not going to know what that is either. I'm probably going to have to go to some service document of some kind. It could be either the owner's manual for that item, or I can go to their knowledge base site on their website for whatever the printer manufacturer is, and try to look up code 46. Actually, that's been pretty easy to do nowadays. I found that A-plus technicians are not so much know-it-alls every time in every instance as they are excellent researchers. We have to look up stuff a lot of the times. I mean, who knows what code 46 or 57 or whatever else those things are. And then you'll also see some weird codes and information in some of the log files that you'll see as well. So you might need to look up that kind of information. Now, another place you can get log file information is from the log files that are generated by the application. Once again, for example, my Hewlett-Packard software will do that, where I can generate a log, and we saw that a little earlier. But I can also right-click on my computer and choose Manage. And by doing this and going to Event Viewer and then System, we see that we have print-related warnings or information that we can look at here. For example, here it just gave me a warning that somebody deleted the IP network printer. That's okay, I did that on purpose at a previous point while I was getting ready for this particular video. If I want to see all of the print-related messages that I've got, I can select print here and then sort according to source, and then it will now show me all of the other print messages that I've got. A lot of times it might just tell me that I successfully printed or I had some other kind of a problem. Sometimes you can also use the software that came with your printer to print out a status page. Later on, we're going to be talking about scanners just for a little while, and I'm going to show you some examples of things that I printed out as status pages from one of my Hewlett-Packard printers, and then I'll scan it in so that you can see it. That's, of course, would be a handy function of the scanner, and so I can show it to other people, because of where you are, of course, you can't see, these papers that I've printed out with all these status messages on them. And then, of course, there's the diagnostic tools, which largely goes to the same kind of tools that I've already been showing you. Now, once you go through your troubleshooting scenarios and you find out that you've got possibly a solution that you can implement, what do you do? First of all, you confirm that you've isolated the problem, and then you attempt to resolve it with whatever you think the resolution is. When you apply that resolution, then you test it. Maybe it was just needed a driver update that's not printing out certain kinds of documents very well, so you download the latest driver update from the manufacturer. So you then test it by printing out that document again. If it works, you've verified that you've resolved the problem by updating the driver. If it does not work, then you have to go back to the drawing board and start to try to isolate more issues instead. Now, this is just a little bit theoretical, so let me give you another example of how we can actually use this. Let's say that I have printed out a document, and we may have all seen this happen before, and maybe it's a picture of something. It's a picture of somebody's lovely children or something. And the only thing is, it prints out the head and the arms, but it misses the leg. There's supposed to be legs down here, but they're not there. Well, what in the world happened there? Sometimes, oops, took away arms too. Sometimes what happens is if it doesn't have enough memory, for laser printers especially, then it can only print out part of that document. So if it only prints out part of it, it gives me the idea that, you know what, I think I can isolate this to probably being a memory issue. So if I've got some spare DIMMs sitting around somewhere that are compatible with that printer, I'll install them into the printer and then test it out by printing another picture of this kid. Hey, now the kid has legs and they have horns. So this kid must be in the terrible twos or something like that. So now it's printing out the whole picture. I have now verified that the problem was indeed the memory. Since I've upgraded it, we're now in business. Now, you might also need to get user acceptance from this. If I'm working in a computer repair shop of some kind and I just installed a DIMM that I happen to have sitting around or available, then I show this to the user and I say, hey, you know what? It looks like you just don't have enough memory. What we'd have to do is to get you some more memory in order to make this work. I used some memory I had sitting around, but if you want to, we have memory on sale here for $69.95. Well, that's where I have to get the user acceptance. They might say, well, $69 is a little bit beyond my budget right now. Or I could really sell it and say, hey, look at this beautiful picture of this horned child that we've been able to print out. You wouldn't have been able to get that without this extra memory. So you just really talk to the user about accepting, and they don't have to buy the memory, of course. It depends on what they want. But you have to talk to them about accepting the solution that you've provided. Now, the user acceptance is usually much tougher to to get a buy off on if the solution that you propose does not relate to something that they can see and touch. So, for example, if you just say, well, I updated the drivers and it seems to have resolved the problem. Well, they said, well, how do I know you updated the drivers? I mean, I'm not really getting anything that I can see and feel here, and you seem to think that the driver update, and yet you charge me an hour labor for this. So they might have a little bit of a harder time accepting that. That's one reason why it's important to always document everything that you do as an A-plus technician. But this, again, goes back to communicating with the customer, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on in this series. Now finally, let's talk about some of the troubleshooting tools that you might work with. The A-plus exam objectives calls for a multimeter. Wow. I have a hard time imagining us using that too much on printers. First of all, printers, if they are working out of the box when they're new, then you don't usually need to check the voltage on these printers. If they don't work out of the box, what do? You return them. You don't replace the power supplies inside the printers. You return them. So in a practical sense, we don't really use them very much for that. If it's an out-of-warranty item, maybe I have a customer that's a real cheapskate, and yet it doesn't seem like the diffuser is charging properly. It never seems to get hot. I might use a multimeter there to probe into the power connection to see if it's actually getting any juice on that. So that could be one use for the multimeter. In a practical reality, however, honestly, I don't see a lot of A-plus technicians needing that for printers too often. But you're going to need to use a screwdriver if you need to replace parts, or if you're putting in a new maintenance kit, new rollers and things like that. Obviously, you're going to need a screwdriver. Usually it's going to be a Phillips head, but you might also have some Torx or hex heads, depending on the kinds of parts that you're servicing. And then as far as cleaning goes, you can use one of those cans of compressed air and blow a bunch of stuff out, but printers can get to be very dusty because all the paper in them, especially for impact printers. So it's a better idea if you get a vac of some kind of vacuum. And if you could go to your electronics store, there are usually vacuums that are designed specially to not discharge electrostatic discharge where you're working in sensitive electronic components. So you might check out using those types instead to prevent any electrical hazards there. And then one thing that A-plus technicians often will also use is an extension magnet. Well, why do we need that, and what is it? It looks kind of like a pen, and you just pull it out, and it's like a long pointer like your teachers used to use in school. If you went to school when I did, they'd have these long things that were about the size of a pen that extends out like telescopes out like an antenna. But in this case, on the end of it is a magnet. That's useful for being able to reach screws that we've dropped underneath motherboards and behind various components in the printer, and down in there in between the rollers where our fingers aren't small enough to reach. Very handy for that kind of thing. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, your test patterns on your printers are very useful, again, for identifying any blocked print heads or problems of this nature, or platens that are misaligned so that they're getting faded on one side but they're dark on the other. All right, let's go ahead and address scanners as well. Now, a lot of the things that I've already taught you regarding printers applies equally to scanners, so I'm not going to really repeat a whole lot of things. For example, how do you connect a scanner to your computer? Well, you can do it through a parallel port, very rare anymore. In the old days, we used to have those. SCSI ports, again, not very often anymore. In the older days, we used to have that. But nowadays, more commonly, it's going to be FireWire, or most commonly USB. And once again, just like with the printers, we'll typically install the software and drivers first and then plug the scanner in second. Also, a lot of the troubleshooting scenarios, at least in terms of the flow of logic, is going to be similar as well. Now let's take a look at how a scanner actually works. First of all, I'm going to assume in this illustration flatbed, but you just modify this for whatever the requirements are of the scanner. This will be my paper. I'm going to lay that down flat onto the scanner. So we got the paper here, and then I'll have a light that shines onto that paper. What we need to do is to have that light indicate where there are dark areas on the paper and where there are light areas on the paper. The light itself doesn't do that, but a sensor that I'll show later on does. So here will be a light, and I'll just kind of draw a light bulb to illustrate this. You know, I don't know, kind of looks like E.T. or something like that. But anyway, light's coming out of this thing, and it reflects onto the paper at an angle. And then it reflects down from the paper down into one of two mirrors that we have. Here's my first mirror right here. Okay, and I'll just call this M1 for first mirror. And then after it hits the mirror here, it ricochets off and hits a second mirror, which I'll put over here. This will be M2. When it hits the second mirror, and my angles aren't too good here, but it then shines across over here to a couple of things, a few things really. One of those things will be some kind of a filtration process. That's what the scanner manufacturer will use to treat the light in order to focus it properly into a lens that we have. Okay, and this will be a high quality lens in most cases. That's L for lens. And the light passes through this lens, and then finally it's recorded in the image over here at the destination, and this will be our sensor. Normally this is going to be a CCD, which stands for charge coupled device. This is very similar to the kind of a sensor that appears in digital cameras as well, or it might be a contact image sensor or a CIS, but we don't see that very often. A CIS would be the same size as the actual device you're scanning, or the paper in this case, and it just kind of lays there and reads that direction. More commonly you're going to see this type of an item, a CCD, instead. Let's talk a little bit more about some of these additional parts. First of all, let's start back here again with our light. This can be a number of different kinds of lights. It doesn't really matter. One's not necessarily better than the other, but it could be a fluorescent bulb, it could be a cold cathode fluorescent lamp, or a CCFL, or it could be a xenon lamp. Xenon lamp, of course, just like the xenon headlamps in automobiles, are usually the higher quality. So they're going to be a little more expensive, but they also give you a better color reproduction and pretty long bulb life here as well. And then this light, especially in a flatbed scanner, is going to move back and forth across the surface of the paper here so that it can read all the way up and down that paper. How does it move on that? Well, there's going to be a stabilizer bar that this thing rests on, and the stabilizer bar is usually it's about a 1/2-inch diameter steel rod, a stainless steel rod. And it's fastened securely to the inside of the scanner, and it provides a smooth ride all the way up and down the distance of that page, and it makes sure that there's no kind of stuttering or wobbling as it passes, because then that would of course cause problems with our final image. And that stabilizer bar works in conjunction with, or really is a part of, something else that we have here called a stepper motor. The stepper motor is an exact, precise motor that will move this head up and down along the stabilizer bar in exact increments to make sure we get a good image. So what kind of scanners could we have? Well, the first kind of scanner we could have would be a handheld scanner. Now, given that I told you just a moment ago that you need to have an exact scan up and down using a stepper motor and something like a flatbed scanner, you can imagine that even the person with the steadiest of hands, maybe they're a brain surgeon, they're still not going to be able to be as exact as you would be able to get with something like a flatbed scanner. So these are for quick, one-off, portable kinds of scans where you might need to just do something kind of quick and dirty. It's not meant for total accuracy when you're using these. But the more accurate ones are probably going to be flatbed scanners, but they're also a little bit slow. Because a flatbed scanner, you have to put one sheet at a time into the flatbed, you close the cover, you push the scan button, and it scans it, and then you got to move on to the next one. In fact, that's exactly what happened last night. Because with this new multifunction device that I installed just yesterday, which is when I recorded that video, my daughter came down and said, one of my friends doesn't have her homework. And so she needs me to scan, and we scanned pages out of her math book, scanned her pages out of her math book so that we're using our flatbed scanner, and then we faxed them to her using the same fax machine that's integrated into the multifunction unit. But the flatbed scanner, of course, was a little bit slower. It's kind of awkward as well because the math book was heavy, and quite frankly, there's a lot of math in there that I don't even understand or remember anymore, but I didn't tell my daughter that. But I just took one page and held the book open, scanned it along the flatbed scanner. It's much easier if you can use a sheet-fed scanner. So if I have a booklet or something that I can unstaple and just put it into the sheet-fed portion of the scanner, then it can just run the whole thing through, and it can read probably 25, 50 pages, depending on the kind of scanner that you get. So again, the big advantage of the handheld is convenience, but the quality is poor. Advantage of the flatbed is good quality, but it's slow. The advantage of the sheet fed is that it's fast, but you can also get pretty reasonably good quality out of the sheet fed as well. It's just that whatever it is that you're scanning might not have a form factor that allows you to use sheet fed, like a math book. In terms of the installation, once again, that's pretty easy, and it's pretty much the same thing that we do for printers. When it comes to configuration, however, let's go ahead and take a look at some scanner properties. So here I am in the settings for my HP Director, and I'll go to settings, and I can go to scan settings and preferences and scan picture, document, or other preferences. For example, the picture settings are going to be different than the document settings. Pictures are likely to be color, documents likely to be black and white, so they will have different requirements. For the picture settings, if I select that item, for example, then we see that we get to the scan picture button, and then it'll give me the option to modify the scan picture settings if I want. Now, if I totally mess all of that up, I can always click back here to where it says restore defaults, but I'll go to that item, and I can choose the PPI. PPI in digital imaging regarding digital cameras, printers, and scanners is points per inch. So PPI is 200 right now. I could go all the way up to 19,200 points per inch, and that's just a measure of the resolution that we'll scan to. I can also specify the number of colors. 24-bit color gets me millions of colors, but of course it's also going to be a larger file. So if I went to 24-bit color and 19,200, wow, that could be a pretty huge file. I'm going to leave these settings the way they are for the time being. Then of course I can change where I wanted to save the settings and other preferences here, whether I want to scan the cropped pictures as automatically, whether I want to scan multiple pictures. So you see all of these kinds of settings are things that we can configure here. Oh, I better go back to this save settings item, by the way. By default, it goes to a JPEG image. This is a compressed image, which is a pretty good image, but you can do other things as well. A bitmap image is also compressed, but it can only go up to 256 colors. A GIF or a GIF image, depending on who you're talking to, is also a pretty low quality image that we usually use only for web purposes, but a TIFF image in the highest form would be uncompressed, but extremely huge in terms of the image size. A compressed TIFF would do just that. It would be very high quality, but it would also be compressed, and you lose a little bit of quality. To most people, they won't be able to tell the difference between any of these. I can probably tell because I'm a photographer and I work with all of these formats, so I might be able to see some of the differences between a lot of those things, but most people won't be able to tell the difference, and JPEG is usually the best way to go for overall purposes. Now, depending on which one of these I've chosen, I also have various options here. I can choose to go to a large or a small file. The larger file I go to, the less compression it uses. The smaller the file I go to, the more compression it uses. And the more compression it uses, the less image quality I get as well. You may have also seen this kind of an item, the progressive, early in the days of the internet web browsers. Then you would see a picture loading in a web browser, and it would kind of gradually show it to you in kind of a fuzzy look, and then it would get a little bit sharper, and you could see it scanning from top to bottom, and then it would scan again from top to bottom, and this was what we called progressive, but we don't really see that quite as much anymore because it's not necessary now with more people having very high-speed internet connections. By contrast, nowadays, most of the images just don't appear at all until they're fully loaded, and then you can see the entire thing as it loads from top to bottom all at once, instead of making multiple passes. Now, of course, if I'm working with just a document, here I'm scanning a picture, but if I'm just scanning a document, then the Scan Document button would do different things. For example, with a photograph or a picture, there's not text usually involved. Well, here with a document, I want to scan editable text or optical character recognition, which would then possibly allow me to export this to something like a Word document, where I could then edit that text, for example. I can also specify whether the original also contains graphics like a pie chart or a bar chart or something like that, and that will affect the image quality as well. Also identifies where I want to save the file. And much like we showed you for the picture, you can modify these settings to different kinds of things that we see here. I think most of these things will explain themselves. As well as the editable text settings for things like our OCR. We can choose which language we're trying to send these things out to. So those give you some idea for the various options that are available for a scan. Now let's just go ahead and scan something. All right then, using my flatbed scanner, I've placed a document onto the flatbed scanner. I'm going to go ahead and scan a picture. So I'll click on this item, and you can just see how this works. I also have buttons on the actual scanner itself that I could use instead, but the advantage here is I can specify exact settings here within the software. So I'll just go ahead and scan this item. Notice that I can scan it to an application like HP's Image Zone, which I could use for editing the photograph, for example, or I could copy it to a clipboard, save it to a file, whichever way I want to go. I'm going to go ahead and use the default, which was, where to go, HP Image Zone, and I'll go ahead and scan that image. All right, then here we see it starting to scan. The thing we're scanning here is kind of a postcard that the Viper West F-16 stunt team does from the U.S. Air Force. I was the photographer that took this picture for their postcard. I was really privileged to work with this group. I was the only one that's able to get this close to that particular stunt team. So I was pretty happy about it. Okay, so we have this document now. What do I want to do with it? Well, you can see there that we can do a number of things if we want to. If the color's kind of faded, we can restore that color. Notice that it kind of saturates the color up a little bit more. We can do a lot of these different other things as well. I'm not going to get into Photoshop types of tools that we can use here, but I'll just click on accept here, and we'll see that it does exactly what it told me it would do now. It takes it to the HP image zone. And so then as I continue to work with it, it automatically opens up HP image zone, and we can work with this image this way now. And it's kind of bent up and everything. I kind of put it in my camera bag, and it kind of got all crinkled and stuff, but you get the idea for what the item looks like. So that's one way that we can work with those sorts of things. Now the next thing I'm going to do is going to scan a few other documents related to the test pages and diagnostic pages that I was talking about earlier when I was testing our printers. Now I want to be able to show them to you, so I'll go ahead and scan them and return to recording once that's been completed. Alright, so the scanner finished scanning all those documents, this time through the sheet feeder that's attached to the top of the flatbed. This particular scanner does both. If you have only a flatbed scanner, you may be able to buy an attachment that allows you to use a sheet feeder on there. But I'm going to go ahead and do this document scan. That's just what I called it. It just created a PDF file for me. And this is the first thing that we saw. This was the status page. Let me go back to Director so I can explain which each one of these are. So as you go to the director here, remember we went to settings, and then we went to our toolbox, that we were able to go to print diagnostics and so forth. The print diagnostic page gives me this page right here, identifies the printer and a serial number, and the scan isn't as high resolution as I could have made it, but if we had seen any gaps in this grid down here, in the real version there are none, but that would tell me that there might be a blocked up print head somewhere. So that was the first thing that we scanned. The second thing that we scanned is going to really alarm me here, because as I zoom in on this, you see that it's supposed to be in color, but we're getting mostly black and white, and maybe a little bit of magenta in there, and some blue, or cyan that is. What this is really saying is that my color cartridge is severely blocked up and jammed. I hardly ever print color on this one anymore. I use my color laser or my photo printer, my Epson Photo R4 320. So I haven't used this color cartridge for a while, but this is a good example of what you'd see if someone did want to print color and said, hey, why does this stuff turn out looking like crap? Well, you print out this page and you'll see that the problem is I've got a blocked up print head. In order to resolve that, by the way, what you would do is to go back to your toolbox here, or whatever's the equivalent for your particular item, and click Clean the Print Cartridges. Now, I'm not even going to do that in my case because it does require some ink, and I don't want to use up an ink, but it almost doesn't matter because my print heads are so blocked up, I'll probably just have to return, or rather replace, the cartridge, because a lot of times the heads, the nozzles, are integrated into the cartridge. So if I want to get back to color, that's pretty much just what I'm going to have to do. So I'll zoom out here again, and we'll go down to our next page. All right, as we go to the next page here, oh, this was a calibration page. It didn't scan this one very well. So I don't know if it went in crooked or whatever happened, but you do run into this from time to time. What happens with the calibration page is it actually lines these numbers up perfectly vertically on the page. Scanner didn't seem to like it for some reason. You might have to straighten things out. You know, scanners aren't perfect. That's just the way it goes sometimes. And then this was the Windows XP printer test page. Remember we looked at when we installed this particular printer a while back here, the color laser jet. Well, I printed a test page to make sure that it printed out okay. This was the one that was connected to my TCP/IP port of 10.10.10.60. And it also identifies all of the various printer drivers that are used in coming up with this test page. So basically, if you get a test page and it looks anything like this, you did pretty good. So if you get just gobbledygook, probably chances are you've got a PCL print driver trying to print out to a PostScript printer or vice versa. All right, let's see. I guess I got another thing I stuck in there as well. Oh, yeah. My 8-year-old son, gave me a Christmas card a while back. So he did this for me, and ever since I've pinned it up on my corkboard in my office, just kind of remind me that I've got a Merry Christmas card from Cooper. And this is just one of those things that, although it's not very pretty, has a lot of sentimental value. One of those things we put in scrapbooks and stuff like that. So anyway, that's how we go about scanning our documents. In this nugget, we continued our discussion of printers, part 4, and I'll bet you're glad to be done with printers at the end of this video. And we started off by talking a little bit more about the configuration options that are available to us, and we also discussed some maintenance issues, some things that you might need to replace, you know, the rollers, you might have a maintenance kit you need to install, and we also looked at troubleshooting issues. Man, there's a lot of different things, a lot of different paths that you could go through with troubleshooting. Don't ever discount Microsoft's own online troubleshooting methods, however, that we get when we try to print out our test page. They actually work pretty well in a lot of cases. And then we also looked at scanners. Remember, a lot of the things we talked about with printers also apply to scanners, but we did talk about some things unique to scanners and demonstrated some of the things that you'll see when you scan. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.